When I was a boy, I created my first newspaper. I got a sheet of A4 printer paper and a pen and a ruler and created some boxes and wrote in some stories about what was going on in our house and in the world around me. And then I photocopied it and I tried to sell it to my parents for 10p a copy and didn't realize, of course, that they were paying the production costs. But I've always loved the way that words can uncover the world, can help us explore it, help us reflect on it, and can connect us, and how words and stories in particular can help us unearth the human potential. So I'd like to share with you my vision for how journalism can play a key role in creating a more flourishing world. Journalism has done and continues to do incredible things in the service of freedom and justice and democracy and development, and investigative journalism in particular, uncovering wrongdoing and holding power to account. But the negativity of the news limits journalism's ability to serve society. Journalism is a fact-based medium, but in selecting information and in framing it, it creates stories. And cognitive science tells us that it's narratives and stories which we use to draw meaning from the world. And the news media is society's biggest storytelling machine. Stories are the bedrock of our culture. And of course, the news presents only a tiny fragment of what's going on in the world, and it's a fragment that often shows humanity at its worst. And it's easy to forget things like, as the Harvard professor Steven Pinker points out, that the world is actually now more peaceful than ever. A thorough analysis of the data shows that we're not seeing the scale of wars that we're used to in the past and the level of deaths. And although, of course, there's tragic conflicts going on right now in the world, such as Syria, and we've seen a spike in recent times, but the long-term trend is that the number of wars and conflicts taking place worldwide is falling. The rate of homicide around the world is falling. We're seeing new health problems like obesity, but on the whole, the world is much healthier than before. There's more democracies in the world than ever. We're making progress on a number of different fronts. But interestingly, research from the Ipsos Mori Social Research Institute shows that public perception of key social issues is out of step with the reality. So our perception of things like levels of teenage pregnancy, of crime, of benefit fraud and immigration, the perception is that they're way higher on the whole than they actually are. So the impact of journalism on the collective social consciousness, on our perceptions and our behavior is significant. And I'm fascinated by how this works and what the implications are. Research is showing that negative news affects our mental health. It can cause anxiety and depression, and it can disengage us from society. It can affect our levels of trust. It can affect how we perceive other people. It can make us look at other people more negatively. But interestingly, there's an emerging body of research that's showing the impact of when we present positive stories. So more positive forms of journalism, they boost our mood, but they can also engage us more in society. So recent research from the University of Southampton is showing that when people read positive stories, they're more inclined to take pro-social actions, such as donating to charity or voicing their opinions or acting to protect the environment. And there's some interesting biochemistry which I think relates to this. The positive emotions specialist Barbara Fredrickson has found that when we experience positive emotions, our bodies release the chemical oxytocin. And this chemical is sometimes referred to as the cuddle drug because it's released when we hug. And the neuroscientist Paul Zak calls it the moral molecule because it correlates with increased levels of trust, not indiscriminate trust, but trust and generosity and empathy. Oxytocin helps us connect to other people. So what really excites me when I think about this is if we brought all the resources, the skill, the talent that we have in journalism to telling a more positive story about the world, what would the implications be for us as a society? Well, the good news is that this is beginning to happen. So alongside positive news, there's an increasing amount of publications that are now presenting positive and constructive stories about what's going on in the world. So positive news focuses on really positive developments and solutions to the problems that we're facing. So we tell stories about things like in Portugal, where they've cut heroin use in half by connecting drug users with communities rather than sending them to jail. Or in Wales, where they've just announced legislation that will protect future generations against the impact of climate change. It means their public bodies have to take sustainability into account in everything they do. Or in London, where they brought babies into schools to interact with children so that the children can learn empathy. And there's really strong data showing that this is helping reduce levels of bullying and aggression in the schools, and it's teaching the children emotional intelligence. But as well as these stories, there's a new emerging field called constructive journalism. And we're seeing the mainstream press now taking a huge interest in this. And this isn't so much about what we're reporting on, but more about how we're reporting. And the aim is to bring more positive elements into conventional, rigorous journalism. It's based on the kind of research I talked about the impact of the news on our behaviours and perceptions, but it's also learning from other fields such as the behavioural sciences. So we're creating tools to give to journalists to create quality reporting that's more compelling, more engaging, and tells a fuller, richer picture of the world. So we're looking at things like the angles that we take on stories. Can we address a problem or a social issue and still deliver the same important core facts, but look at it through a lens of where someone is tackling that issue and where some progress has been made? Where's the seed of innovation? And how can we tell a compelling story through that lens? We're looking at interview technique. So rather than just asking questions about the past, can we ask questions about the future? Can we ask people about their dreams and ideas? And can we ask people about their strengths? Can we uncover their resilience, uncover how they may have grown from traumatic experiences, rather than just asking questions that might foster their victimization? And a pioneer of constructive journalism, Catherine Goldenstead, she's carried out research that has shown that if we have an article that, even if it's predominantly a piece of bad news, if we have a positive peak midway through the article, and if we have a solution-focused conclusion, this creates the most engagement from readers. She looked at various different structures for a news piece, and this one readers responded to most strongly. They found it trustworthy, and they remembered the most story-related information. We're seeing now that the digital age is really disrupting journalism, and this is creating huge opportunities because media want to maintain and grow their audiences. And what's particularly interesting is that we're seeing from social media that positive content is hugely viral. The Huffington Post, for example, reports that its positive stories are shared 3 times as much as its other stories. And research from the business school at the University of Pennsylvania found that the articles that were shared the most were the ones that evoked a sense of awe and meaning. So maybe we'll get to the point where instead of the slogan for the news being, "If it bleeds, it leads," maybe it'll be something like, "If there's awe, they want more." And so we're now seeing more and more media adopt this approach because they realize it's not just good for journalism, but it's also good for engaging readers, and it's good for them financially. The Huffington Post has just announced a global editorial strategy to publish quality journalism about what's working in the world. The New York Times has a regular column about solutions to social problems. The Washington Post has recently launched a newsletter that has positive stories in it. There's media groups that are learning these techniques in South Africa, broadcasters in Sweden and Denmark, and the Constructive Journalism Project, where we train people in constructive journalism. We're working with people from all around the world and freelancers and newsrooms. And this is happening at accelerating pace in the US as well, where the Solutions Journalism Network has now trained 40 media organizations in these new techniques. So what I hear from audiences and from those in the profession is that there's an authenticity gap between the story that we're largely perpetuating and what we really feel and And what we know is the full reality of the world and of what's possible. And I think we're reaching peak negativity. With these changes that are happening, the old story of doom and gloom is no longer serving us. But there's a new story emerging. And I think it's, for many of us here today, we're connecting to this story. It's a story where, yes, there are problems and there's suffering and huge tragedy in the world in our individual lives and collectively. There's unprecedented crises like climate change and social inequality that we have to face. But there's incredible creativity and innovation going on. There's incredible opportunity and potential. And it's a story where perhaps our true nature is one of care and compassion and collaboration, where we all have the deep desire for connection and for love. And so by bringing our attention to this story, then it'll have an impact on us individually and as a society. So I believe that by bringing more positive and constructive elements into journalism, we can create a more fertile ground for people to be informed, but to be empowered in a way where we can respond effectively to the world we find ourselves in. So like the child creating their own newspaper at home, we can all choose the story that we want to define our world. Thank you very much.